In 1952, there was a novel that was written about a baseball player who was a young pitching prodigy. He was headed off on a train with one of his friends, to try out for the big leagues. And early on in the novel, he says this. He says, "Sometimes when I walk down the street, I bet people will say, 'There goes Roy Hobbs, the best there ever was to play the game.'" There goes Roy Hobbs, the best there ever was to play the game. Some of you recognize that movie, that line from a movie, right, called The Natural? 1984, believe it or not. Seems like a lifetime ago, which actually was a lifetime ago for many of us here. You may not have known there was actually a book by the same name called The Natural, and the story is built on this ambition of Roy Hobbs to become the best there ever was. Through the events of his life, he actually gets to the big leagues late in life. He was 33, but that season, if you've seen or read the book, he kind of lights up the team, the New York Knights, in the midst of a pennant race. And that causes the team in the midst of this pennant race in the book to have this thing they called Roy Hobbs Day, which was celebrating his great achievements. And during this celebration, he stands at home plate, and it's kind of a scene reminiscent, if you've ever seen The Pride of the Yankees, or maybe, I don't know if anybody's here old enough to remember when Lou Gehrig actually retired, and he stands in Yankee Stadium and says, "Today I consider myself to be the luckiest man on the face of the earth." It was kind of that kind of scene, and Roy Hobbs tells this crowd, "Maybe I might break my back while I'm at it, but I will do my best, the best I am able, to be the greatest there ever was in the game." Later on, in a more quiet moment with somebody, he says, "I wanted everything. If I had started out 15 years like I tried to, I'd have been the king of them all by now." The king of what? The best in the game. She said, "You're so good now." He said, "I'd have been better. I'd have broken every record there is." Couldn't you be satisfied with just breaking a few? Not if I could break most of them. Now, if you've ever seen the movie, you know how it ends, right? Hits a home run. If you've ever read the book, you also know how it ends, which isn't with a home run. The book ends with a strikeout on a bad pitch. You ever felt like your life was more like the book than the movie? You spend your life, your time, dreaming of being the best there ever was, and it seems like all you do is strike out. Now, maybe you hit a bloop single now and then. Maybe you stretched a single into a double. Or maybe you're so old you stretched a triple into a double. But you had those dreams. But you never quite hit the home run you were looking for, and you seem to never quite get there. I mean, your dreams weren't the Roy Hobbs best there ever was kind of dreams. But you have these ideas about how life will turn out and what it's going to look like when you get there, and they're almost always good dreams. Nobody sets out to fail. So when you're young, you have the dreams and you have the ideas of where you want to be and what life's going to look like. And then the years start ticking by and they start to pick up steam. And before long, you start to realize there are more years behind than in front. That's a rather uncomfortable moment that once it comes and you start doing the math, you're like, man, I wish my teacher taught me a different kind of math because I don't like the way this is working out. You get to that place where the things that we have dreamed have not come true, and time is running out, and we start to realize I'm never going to get where I wanted to be. It's what some have described the midlife crisis. That's when people get stupid and start doing things to try to just recover that one last time, try to drink from that fountain of youth again. And yet the years of youth and the energy that went along with it are long in the rearview mirror. And you start to feel the weight of broken dreams. I don't know what your dreams are. I'm not talking about the dreams you have at night. Sometimes those are good, sometimes those are bad. I'm talking about the dreams you have during the day. when you're awake, when you're sitting at your desk kind of imagining where you were supposed to be by now, or where you hope to be one day, or maybe it's that dream job, or the dream vacation, or the dream car, or a dream spouse, or a dream family, and you sit there and you say, if only I something, then I could be happy and fulfilled. And you spend your life in pursuit of that dream. You spend your life going for that ideal, that thing that we want more than anything else, that thing that we think, if only we had this, we would finally bring and find that satisfaction that we can't seem to find anywhere else. Oh, we go through periods of life where we say things like, man, this is a dream come true. Or, I'm living the dream. We even have people who say things like, if you dream it, you can do it. And so all over the world and all through our lives, we end up chasing rainbows. And we never quite seem to find the pot of gold. It's always just over the next hill or around the next corner. And pretty soon, to mix our metaphors, we have turned the corner and we're over the hill. And it's not there. Sometimes our lives end up, we feel like our lives are just the wreckage of what we had hoped for that we're never going to get. We become a little bit disillusioned with life, sometimes even disillusioned with God. We become a little bit jaded, cynical, because we put our hope in something that let us down. And that dream can turn into a nightmare. So I look out this morning, this crowd, I love you being here this morning. But I see people at all walks of life. Some of you are right in the middle of it. Kind of like me. I'm right in the middle. I'm 49. I think I'm probably a little bit past the middle, but I'm going to call it the middle, all right? I'm thinking to myself, all those dreams, all those things, look back to the 20s and not the 1920s. Some of you can look back that far, maybe. All right, but you look back at a time in life where you had all these big dreams of everything was going to turn out, and now you're like, whoa, wait a second, what happened to that? And there's a sense, even it gets so bad for some that you begin to wonder, can I even survive? I'm not talking about thriving. I'm just talking, can I survive? A lot of people in the middle of life end up with broken dreams and broken ideals that never quite seem to pass, and they think, I don't know how bad death is, but however bad it is, it's got to be better than this. Some of you are nearer to the end of life. You're in your senior years and you're looking back and thinking what might have been, what could have been, if only I had, if only. The beautiful thing, some of you are on the front end of that. You're building your dreams. You're pursuing them. You're energetic. You're filled with life, and you've decided this is what I want, and I'm going to go after it hard. And some of you are not even there yet. You're back in high school, maybe college. You're not even sure what you want to do. You're just trying to figure out what life's all about. You're hoping to get through math class this week, right? Some of you hoping to graduate. And you're going to start building those dreams. You're going to figure out what life will look like when you look back on it. Now here's what I want to say to you this morning. There are people in all those places of life. And I don't know exactly where you fit. But here's what I have for you this morning. Is that so many of our broken dreams, so many of our broken ideals come about because we never figured out what life was supposed to be like to begin with. We went down the road of living for something, and then we got it and found out that's it. I have pursued a little education in my life. Early on, I was getting education to get degrees. Later in my life, I got education to get knowledge. But I remember I finally finished my doctoral degree, and I'm sitting there when I passed my defense, and I left the room, and so they could talk amongst themselves. I kind of consider that gossip, but they didn't feel like repenting about that, so they called me back in after a little while. I walk in the door and say, "Congratulations, Dr. Rogier." I'm like, that just sounds weird. That sounds odd. And I was like, great, this is good. And then I walked out of that room. I got on the train in Chicago to head back home, and I thought, that's it? That's all this is? I did all that to get this feeling? See, some of you pursued your dreams and pursued your ideas, and you get there and say, whoa, I lived all my life, and I worked all that hard, and this is all I got for it. How do we figure out what's worth living for? How do we figure out what dreams at the end of it, what dreams are going to be enough to make us look back and say, that was worth it? There's an old political saying, all politics is local. Same is true about brokenness. All brokenness is local. There's a reality in which other people's brokenness is usually irrelevant to me. I may tolerate them talking about it for a little while, but I got to move on to bigger and more important things like my own brokenness. You see stories in the news about how some tragedy happens, and you're like, oh man, that's bad. That's too bad. But it's at a distance. It's a lot more bad when it's close to home. See, our dreams are different for all of us. Your dreams that you've had in your life, the dreams that you have right now, really come about by three things. Number one, they are the inner desires, the things that are built into us. And this is one of those things that's always been weird to me, is that people don't like the same things I like. And I don't quite understand that. I don't understand why people don't like to sit down and watch sports on TV. And my wife, sometimes I do this. My wife says, who do you want to win? I say, I don't care. I'm just watching it for the ball game. I just want to see what happens. It's I don't know. I can't explain that. I've just always loved sports, and I have certain desires that are just built into me. I don't know what that is. You have other ones. Sometimes our dreams come from the things that are built into us, just our personality. Sometimes they come from cultivated desires. The things that we have built up in our lives and developed over time. My desires have changed over the years. There are those things that are built in, but there's also the desires that we cultivate through things that we try out. Maybe books we read or experiences that we have, and those become part of our dreams. That kind of and we look back and say, I never thought I'd like this. But I actually like it. Why? Because we cultivated it. Sometimes our dreams come from the input we receive, the people that we're listening to. You see people's life around you, like, yeah, man, I'd like to have that. Or that'd be pretty nice. That's, by the way, one of the biggest dangers of social media. Some of you are still on social media in various capacities or this or the other thing. And one of the big dangers is you see the lives of all the people you went to high school with, and you're like, wait, my life isn't quite as good as theirs is. I don't have those kind of pictures of whatever it is. And you start comparing yourself to them. And by the way, their life really isn't as good as it looks on there either, probably. But it becomes this comparison thing where we end up looking and saying, my life's not quite that good. My life's not quite like theirs is. And so we develop our dreams and we start pursuing them, and they become the things that we want more than anything else. They're the things that we think will fix the brokenness and the hurt in our lives. They're things that we think that'll fill the emptiness and make us what we want to be. No one dreams about creating brokenness, not for ourselves. I mean, we might create it for others, but only because we're pursuing our own dreams. Along the way of our dreams, we start giving up certain things. I remember reading an autobiography of a guy who became the CEO of one of the Fortune 500 companies. He said from the day he started working at this company, his goal was to be the CEO. And he got there. And along the way, it cost him his family and a couple of wives. I say, was it worth it? I don't know how he'd answer that question. I look back and say, he gave up an awful lot. What did he get for it? We give up things to achieve, and then when we don't get what we want, we experience the brokenness. Why? Because we had our heart set on this. And what do we call something that we have set our heart on so much that we'll give up everything else to pursue it? What do we call that? We call it an idol. We've never quite thought about it in those terms sometimes. Because idols are those weird-looking stone images, right? But not really. The idols are the things in our heart, the things that drive us, that we will give up everything else to get. You know, our dreams and our desires are affected by the brokenness and the sinfulness in our world. Solomon, you're familiar with a man named Solomon, right? He was the king of Israel. And he wrote a book entitled Ecclesiastes. Some of you may have read that book before, and you keep reading it again because, frankly, Ecclesiastes is a little bit hard to understand sometimes. And the reason it's a little bit hard to understand is because Ecclesiastes is all about life, and frankly, life is a little bit hard to understand. But he has this word in Ecclesiastes. It's a Hebrew word, hevel. I guess it sounds a little bit like a curse word, and it kind of does, but in a sense it means, what in the world is going on here? What in the world is life about? Solomon says, I have pursued everything in life, and it is confusing to me. It is hevel. I have no idea what to make of it. He looks at all the brokenness around him. He looks at all the things, and he said, I pursued everything that can make my life happy. I had money, I had gardens, I had buildings, I had servants, I had everything I wanted, and at the end of it, I don't get it. Some of you think, man, if I just had a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, then I'd be happy. And you know what the guy who had it all said? It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it. Why did that happen? Well, sin in our lives, sin has given us a distorted view of what was important. Remember back in the Garden of Eden, we talked a little bit about it last week when the serpent comes to Eve and says, Eve, did God really say you can't eat of that tree? Yeah. That's what he said. Satan says, God's lying to you. God's not telling you the truth, and God's not being good to you. You're not going to die. God just doesn't want you to be like him. God knows in the day you eat of it, you can be just like him. Eve, wouldn't you like to be just like God? He planted that seed of a dream. And she ate. And all of a sudden, what came out of that was not nearly what she expected. Sin had distorted her view of what was important. Sin causes us to have a distorted view of relationships. A distorted view of money, a distorted view of occupational success, a distorted view of family. Sin has caused us to view the world in the wrong way. And the result of that is that we build our dream on lesser things. And then when we don't get them, we feel like our life's been destroyed. And we feel broke. We feel like, I can't get what I want. Sin gives us a distorted view of why something is important. Not just a distorted view of what is important, but a distorted view of why it is important. Sin teaches us that I am most important. My life is about me. And my life would be a whole lot better if you understood that your life was about me. But then you think the same thing, right? We all have this inborn tendency to look at ourselves and think, I am the most important thing in the world. Sin has convinced us that everything in the world exists to make me happy. Or at least not to make me upset. It's about me. And the sooner the world recognizes it exists to make me happy, the better off we're all going to be. Sin has convinced us that something is important because I think it's important. You ever thought about when you get upset? You get upset when you lose something that's important to you. You get upset when somebody takes away your peace of mind. Somebody comes in and interrupts your peace of mind, and you get upset about that. Why? Because it was important to you. It's robbed you of your convenience. You see, you put your trash out at the street every week, right, for the trash man to come along. You don't get upset when somebody goes through the night before and steals stuff out of it. In fact, you don't even consider it stealing, do you? I don't know if you have, in our neighborhood, we have scrappers go down the street. They're looking for anything metal, because they scrap it and make money off of it. And frankly, I don't get upset when people take that because I didn't want it to begin with. When do I get upset? When somebody goes through and takes something I want. When somebody goes through and steals my car, all of a sudden I get upset about that because I wanted the car. I didn't want the trash. You see, when do we get upset? We get upset when somebody has taken a dream that we wanted and they have robbed it. Sin also gives us a distorted view of God's love and grace. Sin has caused me to assume that my knowledge of the world and my knowledge of life is greater than God's is. And that's why when I don't get my dream, I ultimately blame God for it. God, why didn't you give me? And you fill in the blank with what it was. God, I needed this to make me happy, and you never gave it to me. God, this is what I needed more than anything else, and you withheld it to me, and you said you loved me. Why did you do that to me? Sin causes me to think that God doesn't love me. If God really cared, he would have given me what I wanted. He'd have given me what I needed. After all, isn't that God's job in life? God's job is to make me happy, to fulfill me. God's job is to make me satisfied. And then when we don't get our dream, we get disillusioned. You remember a lady in the Bible named Naomi? Naomi wasn't the only name she had. Naomi is in the Bible, in that short little book of Ruth, 4 chapters long. Naomi had a husband and 2 sons and 2 daughters-in-law. And one day her husband dies. And then her 2 sons die. And she's left with 2 daughters-in-law. And then one, she told me, you guys go back to your life. You can find husbands. You can go back. And the one says, no, I'm not going back. I'll stay. Her name was Ruth. That's who the book is named after. But do you know what Naomi's other name was? She goes back home, and all her friends start coming, hey, it's Naomi, she's coming back. And Naomi says to them, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi? The Lord has witnessed against me. The Almighty has afflicted me. When she lost her dream, she said, God, you've dealt bitterly with me. Remember the story of Jacob? He had sons, and then 11 of his sons going up against the 12th and sell them off into slavery, and Jacob is devastated. I would be. You probably would be too. I mean, I suppose even if you have 12, you don't want to get rid of one. He was devastated. And through the story, as you read in the book of Genesis, to make a long story short, eventually over a period of probably 30 to 40 years, they get reunited. And Jacob and his sons all moved to Egypt with Joseph, the son who was sold. And then one day, Jacob goes and stands before Pharaoh. And he tells Pharaoh kind of his life story. How did you get here? And here's what Jacob says. Few and evil have been the years of my life. Decades later, he is still bitter about what happened. Few and evil have been the years of my life. Sometimes we don't get bitter. Sometimes we just get confused. That was Solomon I mentioned a moment ago. We see our lives, don't get our dreams, and there's a part of us that wants to trust God for them. And we end up saying, God, what have you done to me? God, I don't get it. This is confusing. You're supposed to be taking care of me, and I don't understand what you're doing, God. Sometimes we get obedient. Remember a man named Abraham? God promised him a son, and he didn't get that son, and years later, the son finally comes, and then years and years later, God says, I want you to sacrifice your son. The dream. The son that he had longed for so many years, God said, I want you to kill him. Not some kind of metaphorical offer him up to temple service. Actually kill him. You know what Abraham did? He said, well, let's go. I don't think Abraham was excited about that. I wouldn't be. Not even in the worst moments with our kids. We're like, yeah. I mean, we might say, I'm going to kill you, but we don't actually mean it. We mean something like, I'm going to send you to play in the backyard until I calm down a little bit, right? But interestingly, Abraham refused to hold his dream hostage. How different is that response? He believed, the New Testament tells us, he believed that God was able to raise him even from the dead. We respond different ways. This morning I read for you Philippians chapter 3. This story about the Apostle Paul. Now turn there if you would and follow along, because I want you to see this, because here's a guy who had the life everybody would want. It begins in verse number 4 where he says, if anyone has reason to have confidence in the flesh, I have far more. I have far more reasons. If you think you have a reason to be confident, I have more reasons. Let me tell you what they are. Verse number 5, I was circumcised the 8th day. I was of the nation of Israel. I was of the tribe of Benjamin. I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. As to law, I was a Pharisee. As to zeal, I persecuted the church. As to righteousness, which is found in the law, I was blameless. What was Paul saying? See, here's what you got to understand a little bit about Paul's background. Paul was a Jew. And he was a very religious Jew. And Paul's heart had this religious bent to it that he was determined to pursue the highest level. You know what Paul was saying in Ephesians in Philippians chapter 3, there was a sense in which Paul was saying, I was the best there ever was. I did it all. I was right top. When it came to being a Jew, I was the highest, best kind of Jew there could be. I was living life at the top. Now, your dreams and goals might not be the same. Probably most of you don't care about being circumcised the 8th day. In fact, that's never crossed your mind. All right? But if you were a Jew, that mattered. That was part of the law. If you're going to keep the law, you got to be circumcised the 8th day. And if you miss that 8th day, you know what you'll never be? A full law keeper. You would have missed it. Now, granted, that's not exactly on you. All right? That's kind of mom and dad's job. But that was part of it. That was to be somebody. He was a nation of Israel. He was a tribe of Benjamin. He just narrows it right down. A Hebrew of the Hebrews. He was the who of the who's who. He was the top who of the who's who. He was a Pharisee when it came to keeping the law. Remember, the Pharisees were the people who were so devoted, they kept the law so precisely. That was Paul. He persecuted the church. That's how zealous he was for the faith of his fathers, this Jewish faith that hated the idea of Jesus. He was so devoted to his religion that he persecuted, in fact, even imprisoning them and putting some of them to death. That's how religiously devoted he was to the righteousness which is found in the law. I was blameless. He did every single thing you were supposed to do. He was living life at the top of the heap. Now, let's be real. Your dreams and goals probably don't look like Paul's. This is not what you want. But every person who looked at Jewishness and what it meant to be a Jew, they would have said, Paul, you reached the top. You are the best there ever was. But I ask you this morning, what are the things you glory in? When you look at your life, if you were making this list, what would you include on there? What are the things you say, yeah, I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other thing. I have this achievement, I have this qualification. Look how far I have come. All of us have a list like that. And you know what? There's a real sense in which much of what Paul writes down, there is nothing inherently wrong with it. He kept the law. Was that good or bad? It's absolutely a good thing, right? He kept the law. God gave it to be kept. In fact, there were punishments for not keeping it. You see, Paul's dreams and Paul's goals and Paul's desires in life were not inherently wrong. Many of the dreams in our life are not inherently wrong. You think about some of the ideas you have about your occupation. Some people take a negative view of work. These days we work and live for the weekend so we can be off of work. The Bible doesn't have that kind of view of work. And in the Bible, work is a good thing. You may have never noticed this before, but work actually came before the fall. Work is not the result of sin. Work is the result of creation. As a part of creation, God said, tend the garden, keep it, till it, cultivate it. He was going to do that whether he sinned or not. Work is not a part of the fall. I think there's a sense in which work became hard because of the fall. You're going to work by the sweat of your brow. But work was not the problem. Many times in our lives, we have tied our idea of success into how successful we are in the job. Where did we start and where did we end up on the corporate ladder? We judge it by our income. Are we making more now than we were last year or the year before? Am I getting the respect? We see somebody beside us, they get a raise, and we don't get one. And we're kind of troubled by that, aren't we? Why? Because our idea of success. But many of the ideas of success, the dreams that we have, are not inherently wrong. What does Paul say? Verse number 7. Whatever things were gained to me, those I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. All these dreams I had, all of these things I succeeded at, what I really came to understand is not worth much. In fact, when it comes to knowing Christ, compared to Christ, I count all of these things to be a loss because the surpassing value of knowing Christ is so much greater than all these other things, even if they were good things. He said, verse number 8, I count them as rubbish. manure. They're not worth anything. He said, why? Because his dreams changed. His idea of what it meant to be fulfilled, his idea of what it meant to live had changed because he came to know who Christ was. In fact, he says, verse number 9, I want to be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law. He said, I had that righteousness. But that's not what really mattered. What actually matters was the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. He said, I want to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death. Think about that for a moment. Paul's dream had changed. From being a Hebrew, the Hebrew, and a Pharisee of the Pharisees, he says, now what I want to know is I want to know Christ. I want to know his resurrection power. Many of you, you're with him right to there, right? Yeah, the resurrection power of Christ. I want to know what that's like. But then he goes on to talk about the fellowship of sufferings. He said, I want to suffer with him. In fact, I want to be made conformable to his death. One of the interesting phrases in the book of Acts as the church gets its foundation and starts going in Acts chapter 5, they went out rejoicing that they were considered worthy to suffer. See, most of us, when we lose our dreams, we don't take great hope in that kind of suffering. We think that's miserable. We might even try to put a good kind of God spin on, say, well, at least this is what God has for me. Like the guy who's so convinced in the sovereignty of God that God ordains everything in his life, and he falls down the steps. He says, thank God that's over with. But he's not really joyful about it. He's just accepting this is God, this is fate, this is whatever. But Paul says, I want to rejoice that I have been made conformable. I have been considered worthy to suffer and die with Christ. That was his joy. What happened to him? The answer is he came to understand what life was about. He began to understand that there is something that we have been called for and called to that far surpasses the things of this age. And when we build our life on the dreams of this world, what happens to them? Remember 1 John chapter 2? It says, do not love the world nor anything in the world. For all is in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the boastful pride of life does not come from the Father, but from the world. And this world is passing away, and the desires of it. So many of us have built our dreams on things that are passing away. And then when we don't get them, we are devastated by it. How does the gospel of Jesus Christ answer our broken dreams? How does the gospel help us to understand that? Because when we understand that the thing that matters is God, and we can put aside all of our own desires and say, what God has called me to matters more. I think of people who in ages past have given their lives for the sake of the gospel. I think of some of the great missionaries of the past. I think of a man like Adoniram Judson to the Golden Shore, who went to Burma and labored long and hard, buried wives who successively died, and he left them there. But he did it for the sake of the call of Jesus Christ. And we know men like Adoniram Judson. Maybe you've heard his story before. If you haven't, one day you'll hear it here. A man like John Patton, who went to the New Hebrides Islands, first Christian missionary to go. And he buried a wife in great mourning and sorrow. He talks about the grass that was green because of his tears that had wept on it. People who said, I consider everything to be loss except the surpassing value of knowing Christ and suffering with him, being made conformable to his death. What's the other end of it? Look at verse number 17. Verse number 18, many walk, of whom I've often told you and tell you now, even weeping, they are enemies of the cross of Christ. What does that mean? They're enemies of the cross. Well, their end is destruction. Their end is destruction. What happens at the end is they ultimately get destroyed. Now notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say the middle is destruction. Many people today are chasing dreams that seem perfectly fine. But at the end, you know what they do? They destroy us. Because they were never built to last. They were never meant to be eternal. No, their end is destruction. Their God is their belly. Their dreams are all about satisfying themselves. Their God is their appetite. The things that satisfy them, their glory is in their shame. They glory in things that ultimately are embarrassing. Their minds are on earthly things of this age. Where have you set your dreams? You see, part of the answer, how do we find hope in brokenness? How do we find hope in broken dreams? The answer is sometimes we need different dreams. Notice what he says in verse number 20. Our citizenship is in heaven, from which we eagerly wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform the body of our humble state into conformity with the body of His glory by the exertion of the power that He has to subdue all things to Himself. You see, the problem with us is so many times our dreams are too small. I'm reminded of the words of C.S. Lewis. He said, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the fact that in our dreams, they're too small? They're not big enough. They don't fulfill the majestic calling that God has given us as sons and daughters of His, as part of His family. You see, how does the gospel answer us? The gospel reminds us that the real brokenness in our lives is not the fact that we didn't get the job we wanted, or that we didn't win the lottery, or that we don't have the family we desired. Paul had all of that. And that was the source of his brokenness, because he put more stock in those things than he did in Jesus Christ, and ultimately left him empty. The gospel reminds me my biggest problem is not the dreams I didn't get. My biggest problem is my sinfulness before God. It's not that my dreams are broken, it's that I'm broken. My failure to achieve my goals and my dreams is just that. It's a failure to achieve my goals and my dreams. But I got a bigger problem. You see, Jesus didn't die so you could be the best there ever was. Jesus didn't die so you could have the corner office or the perfect family. Jesus didn't die so you could win the lottery. He died for your sin. Brokenness from our unrealized dreams often, if not always, is the product of sinful thinking. We're living outside of God. We're pursuing satisfaction in things God never intended to satisfy. The gospel meets us not just by telling us what our real problem is, it also reminds us of the cost of that brokenness. Our broken dreams to us cost us something. It can cost us peace of mind and comfort. It might cost time and money. It can cost a lot, but that's not the biggest cost. My biggest problem is my sin, and that sin deserves eternal death. When Jesus died on the cross, it was a reminder that our dreams aren't big enough. And the cost of our dreams, the cost of our desires in this earth can't be paid by anything other than the death of Christ. As bad as the hurt from my broken dreams are, and I have them, I could be going to hell, and that would be worse. You see, Jesus died in my place not to save me from a broken dream. Jesus didn't die in your place to save you from a broken dream. He died to make you a part of His family and to radically reorient you to the life He's called us to live now. And that's what changes our view of life. What's important is Jesus. What's important is that I follow Jesus. What's important is that I lead others to follow Jesus. Where did I get that from? The Scriptures. Everything in this world is passing away. But Jesus is eternal. The gospel reminds me that eternity is far more important than the present. Remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you want. Think about that in your own life this morning. What is it that you're not willing to pray that about? Father, if you want to take this from me, it's yours. And yet so many times we're grabbing on tight. It's almost like trying to grab a fistful of water. The tighter you squeeze it, the more impossible it becomes to hold it. And you begin to see life in view of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel reminds me that my dreams ultimately fall far short of God's plan for us in Christ Jesus. We are citizens of heaven. The problem is we haven't set our eyes on that. We're looking for our dreams to be fulfilled here. And here's what I want to tell you this morning. One day, Jesus is going to return and He's going to transform the body of our humble state into conformity with the body of His glory. That's what we're hoping for. So many times we're setting our dreams on small things. Listen, I'm not telling you to not dream. You know what you need to do? You need to make plans for your life. You need to plan things. You need to desire things. You need to aim for things. You need to shoot for things. You need to plan. Some of you right now, you're in high school or college in that younger age of life. You need to plan where you're going to be in 25 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. You need to plan for that. You need to dream about some things. But at the center of those dreams need to be the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because that's what's going to last. Go get a job. Make $1 million a year. Make $10 million. Tithe. Seriously, go make all the money you can make. But understand, at the end of the day, you know what happens to money when you die? That's why the Psalm says, do not be afraid when one is made rich, because he can't take it after him. You see, those are tools that God has given you for the pursuit of His glory and the furtherance of His mission. Love God. Love His church. Live for something bigger than the dreams that can never satisfy anyway. Keep your eyes on Christ, not on the dreams of this age. The end of the natural. In the movie, it's a home run. In the book, he strikes out. And neither one matters. Neither one matters. At the end of your life on this earth, you might hit a home run. And you might strike out. But neither one matters. We have been called by God to pursue His glory and to live for Him. Don't settle for a lesser dream. Some of you today, you're chasing the wrong things. Repent of that. You've been chasing dreams and things that are ultimately going to pass away. But remember, we have a citizenship in heaven by faith in Jesus Christ. Live for that. Devote your life to that. And when it's all said and done, you might die without a penny to your name. And you'll still be a part of God's family. Because you followed Him. Would you pray with me this morning? Father, it's so easy for us to get our dreams on the things of this world because it's what we can see. But remind us that these things are ultimately passing away. Even the good things here are ultimately passing away. But in Christ we have an eternal hope. We have been made citizens of heaven. May we live for that day. May our dream be the fellowship, the power of His resurrection, the fellowship of His sufferings for the sake of His name. Give us the dreams that coincide with what You're doing in us and through us in the church and in this world. Help us to pursue Your glory more than anything in this world. And when our dreams of this age threaten to break us, remind us our citizenship is in heaven. And we look for the day when we'll be transformed from this humble state into the body of His glory by the power which He has to exert all things to Himself. So, Father, give us that hope. In the midst of our brokenness, remind us our hope is Jesus and our citizenship in heaven, and that will far surpass the brokenness of this age. And we ask this in the name of Christ, our Savior. Amen.